Our story begins in the year 2100 and something, with planet Earth completely devastated. Then, over a ruined city, a mysterious man stands on top of a high-speed fighter jet. He seems to be looking for someone, and with a smile on his face, the guy says he's finally found him. Without hesitating, the white-haired guy simply jumps from the plane toward the city ground. Meanwhile, down below, a young man named Jin Shida runs desperately through the destroyed streets. The young man is completely exhausted and hurt, so he starts screaming for any kind of help. Crying and almost hopeless, the boy continues to beg to see if anyone else has survived. But suddenly, a giant monster with horns appears in front of him, tearing up the asphalt. To make matters even worse, another bizarre green-colored creature also decides to show up. Completely surrounded, the protagonist falls to the ground, pleading for help, but no one appears. With tears running down his face, Jin Shidu screams one more time for anyone who can save him. In that moment, he holds a broken photo of his family as he continues his desperate plea. Seeing the creatures approaching, he thinks about those responsible for having destroyed the world. With his eyes closed, the boy makes one last request for someone to make the guilty ones pay for everything. But before the beast can reach him, blue energy beams slice the monsters into pieces. Jin Shidu stays on the ground, not understanding anything, and a mysterious voice apologizes for being late. Right in front of him is the man from before, and the frightened boy asks who he is. The savior then stares at the protagonist with a serious and determined look, without answering the question. Then, the boy starts to cry with relief, as he finally understood what was happening. With renewed hope, he asks if they can finally have their world back now. The white-haired man confirms that they can, while Jin Shido hugs him, full of hope. But our hero then tells the boy to rest in peace, as he was already badly injured. With one last smile and crying, the young man gives thanks for being saved after all. Jin Shido then falls lifeless to the ground, thanking him one last time as the hero watches over him. The white-haired savior remains silent for a moment, looking a bit thoughtful. Just then, a scientist named Kagura appears and asks if Jin was too late to save the boy. Kagura states that the boy was the last one and tells his friend to face reality and give up. Even hearing this, our white-haired protagonist maintains a serious and focused look. The scientist then reinforces that humanity was gone and there was no more salvation for the planet. It's explained that everything was caused by mutant monsters born from environmental pollution. These bizarre creatures were known to everyone by the dreaded name of corruptors. On top of that, they had an incredible regeneration power and were almost impossible to defeat. Their resilience was so incredible that not even nuclear weapons could take them down. But humanity didn't give up and conducted various experiments on people to be able to fight back. Kagura says that even after finding a solution, there's no one left in the world to be saved. According to him, humanity simply took too long to find a way to fight. However, Jin states with absolute certainty that there is still something worth saving. The scientist then asks if his friend thinks there are still survivors somewhere. With a confident smile, the hero says no, but there will be survivors in the future. Then Jin asks if the nanomachines created by Kagura can also heal the environment. Kagura confirms and explains that the nanomachines not only destroy the corruptor's regeneration, they are also responsible for starting the recovery and complete healing of the entire planet. With this, the hero affirms that one day the Earth will regain its former beauty and return to normal. And in that future, a new civilization will surely arise and prosper, just as humanity did. Hearing this plan, the scientist seems very skeptical and says it's all just a fairy tale. Our protagonist then turns and starts to walk away while his friend says that it's fine by him. Jin Shida then turns with a smile and replies that this small possibility is enough. Then we're taken to a flashback that shows a dark hallway of some kind of laboratory. We see that our white-haired hero's power might be needed in the distant future. Apparently, Kagura decided to believe in this maybe for a chance to save what was left. For the scientist, just having the chance to pass this hope on to the next generation is enough. At that moment, the cryogenic sleep mode is activated, and the year count begins to pass. Many years go by, and the monsters continue to roam freely across the desolate land of the planet. Hundreds of years later, the Earth remains a completely devastated and uninhabitable place. After almost 1,000 years, new and even more bizarre creatures began to emerge over time. Millennia pass, and the monsters continue to dominate everything, evolving in very strange ways. But after more than 17,000 years, the planet finally begins to show signs of recovery. Tens of thousands of years later, the corruptors still exist but seem to be fewer in number. At 84,000 years, nature finally returns to normal and wildlife flourishes. After more than 240,000 years, the monsters finally seem to have vanished from the Earth. Hundreds of thousands of years continue to pass, and planet Earth finally becomes a paradise again. After millions of years, nature is completely recovered and full of new animals. Tens of millions of years later, Earth is a beautiful place with beaches and crystal-clear oceans. Finally, after an incredible 1 billion years, the countdown reaches its long-awaited end. Then the cryogenic sleep release sequence is activated and the process to wake our hero begins. In this new world, we see someone running desperately through a dark and gloomy place. A girl with pointed ears is also on the run and seems to be completely terrified. Shortly after, a group of 3 semi-humans flees from a giant dragon-like monster. The girl asks if the one they're looking for is really there, and her older companion confirms it. Desperate, she says that if the person isn't there, they can consider themselves gone. But the young woman doesn't give up and with a determined look, she keeps moving forward with her group. Apparently, they are looking for a legendary figure known as the Guardian God. The trio finally arrives in front of a giant gate and believes their savior is right there. The girl then uses a type of key to try to open the passage, but the gate seems very heavy. When they enter the place, they realize it's a dead end with a glowing capsule at the top. The girl is speechless and completely disappointed with what she's seeing in front of her. To make matters worse, the monster that was chasing them finally manages to reach them inside. The group is completely cornered, and with nowhere to run, they fall into a complete panic. In a final act of desperation, the girl closes her eyes and screams, begging for the Guardian God's help. Suddenly, the capsule's glass begins to crack, and a mysterious voice says it understood the call for help. In the same instant, the capsule shatters and a bright light hits the monster, throwing the group away. With that, the oldest of the three human says with a smile that he told them it was worth believing. Suddenly, our hero emerges from the capsule with a smile and talks about the possibilities of the future. He then finds a storage box that Kagura developed and sees that his clothes are inside. The white-haired man goes to the computer and is shocked to see that he's 100 million years in the future. Jinshid notices that most of the data is corrupted and thinks it's a miracle the place is still intact. He believes this happened thanks to the nanomachines that were spread throughout the planet's atmosphere. Now he wants to know what happened, but the only clue he has is a message cube from Kagura. But first, the savior turns to hear the trio's story and completely forgets he's not dressed. The older one covers the girl's eyes while Jin says he's been like that for 100 million years. After explaining himself, he finally puts on his clothes and says the suit still fits very well. With everything settled there, the large gate of the old laboratory finally begins to open. As they leave the place, a bright sunlight hits the group's faces, who are not used to it. Our white-haired protagonist then faces the new world for the first time in a long time. Before him lies a beautiful landscape, and he realizes that this is the world 100 million years later. The girl then pulls on his coat, calling him Guardian God, and he notices how different everything is. Next, the young woman points the way and asks the newly awakened one to follow her with her group. The savior looks a bit suspicious but decides to go with them to understand the situation. Along the way, he wonders if they are human but remembers that his race went extinct a long time ago. Then he notices the koala and cat ears and thinks they are new creatures that evolved this way. Jinshid concludes they must have been affected by the nanomachines, and that's why they evolved with animal ears. As proof of this, he says their language is the same as it was 100 million years ago, and then decides to introduce himself. He introduces himself as Shida Jin, and the girl with pointed ears says her name is Hakama Phil, but he can call her Akama. Next, the older one introduces himself as Dan Poo, and the blue-haired boy says his name is Shandy. The hero then asks what they want him to do, and Hakama replies that they are almost at their destination. The girl then explains that they need his help to defeat the corruptors, and Jin is startled by that name. At that, little Shandy gets terrified by something he sees in the distance. The group then spots their village and realizes the whole place is under attack and on fire. Desperate, the blue-haired boy runs towards the village shouting for his parents, but Akama tries to stop him. Our protagonist just watches the two running and seems to be calmly analyzing the whole situation. He then notices that the barricades protecting the village are all made of wood and very simple. Also, all the buildings are made of wood, and the fire spreads very quickly through all the houses. Seeing all this, Jinshido realizes that the civilization of that world doesn't seem to be very advanced. In the blink of an eye, the hero appears right next to the girl, who is startled by his incredible speed. Just ahead, they see an old woman fighting a bizarre monster, and Shandy screams desperately for his grandmother. The old woman then notices their presence and asks Hakama why she decided to return to the village. With a serious look, the white-haired man observes the creature and wonders if that is really a corruptor. He confirms that the appearance is identical and wonders if they are also called that in this new era. Hakama then prepares to fight, saying she will save her grandmother, and the hero notices a strange reaction in her. With that, our protagonist quickly advances towards the monster, saying he needs to confirm something. In the blink of an eye, the hero cuts the creature in half with a single, swift slash of blue energy. With that, he catches the old woman in his arms before she falls and apologizes for the slightly hectic situation. Next, Jin throws her towards Hakama and shouts for the girl to get ready to act right after. Then, the young woman concentrates a strange energy and creates a small fireball using her hands. She then launches her fire sphere towards the creature, which retaliates with a blast of flames. The girl's attack hits the monster's head squarely and causes a small explosion on the spot. The hero notices that the corruptor's regeneration was suppressed by the nanomachines, as expected. He wonders if she used the nanomachines from the atmosphere, but only compatible humans can control them. The protagonist questions if everyone in this era uses fireballs, and the old woman denies it, saying only a few do. She says only those with divine power can do it, and Jin understands that's the name for controlling nanomachines. Hakama runs to her grandmother, asking about the others, and the old woman says she managed to evacuate everyone. Danpu then stands beside Shandy and asks the girl why she decided to come back to the village. With a sad look, the boy's grandmother says that their village was gone and there was no saving it. She then reveals that the corruptor they just faced was only a newborn larva. That creature was just a hatchling that had just been born and wasn't even that strong. According to her, the main body is something they can't handle, and more larvae will attack soon. But a voice suddenly emerges and tells the old woman not to be discouraged and to stay stronger. At that, two warriors appear, and the one with cat ears says he'll finish the monster off by himself. The old woman asks about the villagers, and Sarlis's companion says he sent them to a shelter. At that moment, Hakama recognizes the man calling him father, and he asks where she was. Hakama replies that she went to the sealed gate, and her grandmother gets angry that she went to a forbidden place. The girl explains that her grandmother said the guardian god there would help them in times of danger. With that, the old woman stares at Jin Shid-o with great suspicion and asks if he is the so-called savior. She then adds that he doesn't look like a god at all, and the hero is confused. At this, Sarlis starts laughing at the situation and tells them to stop messing with him. The warrior then calls the protagonist inferior species, and our hero is stunned by the term. Shani then runs to his brother and confirms that the white-haired man is indeed the guardian god. Sarlis points to Jin's ears and says he is inferior for not having any animal power. The boy says they were mistaken and Shandy denies it, saying that Jin took down a corruptor. With a sarcastic smile, Sarlis says he can also take down a larva with a single blow. Hearing this whole discussion, our protagonist just observes the situation with a very serious look. The warrior says this is a village problem and that inferior species are not welcome. He then turns to Jin and tells the newly awakened one not to meddle in their affairs. Sarlis starts to walk away and his friend asks where he's going, and the young man says it's obvious. With a confident smile, he says he's going to take down the great corruptor and for the others to be afraid. Seeing this, Hakama's grandmother calls Sarlis a fool and says he could have survived if he had run. Our white-haired hero just watches the whole situation in silence, looking thoughtful. The old woman then thanks Jin for his help and asks him to take her son and the children to the shelter. She says she will follow Sarlis and risk her life, and Hakama screams desperately for her grandmother. But to everyone's surprise, Jin Shid-o simply refuses the request and the old woman is astonished. Hakama looks at the protagonist with a smile as Jin says he has his own pride too. With a confident look, he states that he won't let someone who called him an inferior species go to their end. Meanwhile, in a nearby lake, the main body of the giant corruptor slowly emerges from the water. Sarlis then faces the bizarre creature and calls it to fight in a very challenging tone. The cat-eared warrior concentrates his energy and says he will become a holy knight. Surrounded by blue lightning, he prepares to fight the invading monster in front of him. Next, Sarlis leaps towards the corruptor, saying he will finish it off by himself. But suddenly, a strange tentacle with a glowing red eye emerges from the lake's water. To make matters worse, several other bizarre tentacles also begin to emerge from the surface. Then two smaller creatures jump in front of Sarlis to try to stop his main attack. The warrior cuts the two monsters in half with his spear and yells for them to get out of the way. He continues his attack towards the main corruptor and says he'll end it all in one blow. Flying through the air at high speed, Sarlis prepares his final attack to hit the creature. He then strikes the monster's head with his electric spear, causing an explosion. With a victorious and blood-stained smile, the warrior seems quite pleased with the result. The giant corruptor then retreats a bit, while Sarlis lands on the ground to observe the beast. However, the wound on the creature's head begins to close and glow with a red light. Sarlis is completely shocked to realize that the monster's injuries are regenerating. Seeing the young man's distraction, the corruptor attacks with its giant claw in a swift motion. The warrior tries to defend himself, but the screen goes dark, and we only see a question mark in the air. Jin creates an energy shield to defend the warrior and asks if he feels better now. Sarlis is completely speechless and stares at the newly awakened one with a look of pure surprise. At that, the corruptor attacks again, but our hero kicks it away with great ease. The white-haired protagonist then notices that the giant creature is still alive and moving. With a hand gesture, the savior simply beckons the monster to come and attack him again. The creature then charges at him with full force, and our hero prepares for combat. But the corruptor is impaled by stakes of light, and Sarlis screams desperately for his chief. The warrior then shouts for someone named Sals as a group of people runs towards them. Hakama's father and grandmother are completely shocked by what they are seeing happen there. The old woman is speechless and wonders what just happened right in front of her. She then realizes that Jin is holding the giant body of the corruptor with just one hand. With that, the hero says it's getting heavy and suggests they should retreat for now. He then grabs Sarlis so they can get away from the creature that is still alive. Jin then leaps away from the danger while carrying the cat-eared warrior on his back. He continues to move quickly away from the battle with the young man being carried on his shoulders. Completely confused, Sarlis asks the white-haired man what he really is. The warrior explains that corruptors regenerate instantly from any injury. Jin says that's why they need nanomachines to be able to inhibit regeneration. Sarlis is confused and asks what these nanomachines he mentioned are. The hero explains that it's what they call divine power and complements the warrior's attack. Sarlis, still in shock, asks if Jin is a guardian god, and the hero says he doesn't remember that. But the white-haired man stands up and says there's something important he wanted to say. He reminds the warrior that he had said the monster was a problem for the village only. Sarlis tries to justify himself, but the savior interrupts him, saying that's not right. Then the protagonist turns to the creature and states that this monster is his problem. With that, the giant corruptor lets out a terrifying roar and prepares to attack with full force. Without hesitation, Jin runs across the water at high speed towards the bizarre and giant beast. With a serious look, the hero says the first step is to immobilize the enemy. At that, he delivers a powerful kick in the air, creating a large golden shockwave in the water. The blow hits the creature squarely and throws it back with the force of the water's impact. Jin explains that these monsters were born because of humanity's foolishness in the past. He then clenches his fist and begins to concentrate a large amount of blue energy. And having lived 100 million years ago, he feels he has the responsibility to resolve this. Gathering a sphere of power, he says he's the only one who can put an end to the situation. Sarlis asks if he can really do it, and Jin confirms that he can with absolute certainty. The hero explains that he is the result of countless and unimaginable repetitions of the past. Furthermore, he is also the personification of the tragic and brutal history of all humanity. And he also represents the entire history of sacrifices and experiments done in laboratories. With an aura of power, he reveals himself as the last human created to fight against the beasts. And with a shout, the protagonist charges forward to deliver his final attack against the corruptor. The giant corruptor lets out a roar of surprise as a blue energy approaches. Suddenly, an immense blast of power is fired towards the bizarre creature. The attack then explodes in a blinding light that illuminates the entire battlefield. With that, all the villagers are completely shocked by what they are seeing. Hakama, on the other hand, looks at her savior with a smile and shining eyes. The energy explosion is so strong that the flash can be seen even from space. After the dust settles, all that remains of the monster are a few glowing pieces in the water. Sarlis is on the ground, completely stunned and unable to believe what just happened. The white-haired man then turns to the warrior and says that he is the last. With a confident smile, he adds that he is humanity's last scientific weapon. After everything, the lake finally becomes calm again, and peace reigns in the area once more. But from a distance, a girl with glasses watches everything, hidden in the forest bushes. She was using a type of spyglass to snoop and is amazed by what she saw happen there. The young woman says that not even the captain of the Royal Capital's Knights could do that. With a determined look, she decides she needs to return to the capital immediately. Later that night, Jin finally manages to activate Kagura's message cube. The scientist then says that if Jin is listening, he is no longer in this world. Kagura asks how the future is and says the environment must have improved a lot. But he reveals that there is a problem, and the protagonist asks what that problem might be. Without beating around the bush, Kagura explains that even with the planet's improvement, the corruptors did not pass away. Our white-haired protagonist remains silent and listens to the message with a very serious expression. The scientist reveals that he felt something strange about 1,000 years after Jin Shid entered cryosleep. Kagura says he also went into cold sleep from time to observe the planet's changes. The scientist explains that with the environment's improvement, the number of corruptors was gradually decreasing. But suddenly, something unexpected happened and completely changed his plans. The satellite camera then focuses on a strange creature with a human form standing in an open field. Zooming in, we see a bizarre being with purple hair and red eyes with an aura of dark energy. Kagura explains that with the environmental changes, corruptors emerged that began to evolve. He didn't know the type of change, but he was sure that creatures would become a great threat. The only thing he could do is to modify the new life forms so they could fight. And on top of all that, he also needed to leave some power for our hero to use in the future. The savior then gets confused and wonders what kind of power the scientist was referring to. He then picks up a green syringe and asks if his friend was referring to that. Kagura says that as soon as he injects the liquid, the nanomachines will show him how to use the power. This is a power that only the hero can use because he has 100% compatibility. Jin Shida then stares at his own hands in silence and seems to be very focused on what he's doing. At that, a small combat knife materializes in his left hand using a bluish energy. He understands that he can create objects and, with a smile, says that this ability is very useful. Kagura reveals that he had other powers like this in various laboratories scattered around the world. He didn't leave everything together to prevent the corruptors from destroying it all at once. Kagura also wanted his friend to travel and see the new world he protected so much. In this distant future, he doesn't know how dangerous the corruptors have become over time. But even so, the scientist believes that the new world is a much better place to live. Compared to the past filled with chaos and destruction, the new civilization has managed to prosper. The hero's friend says with a smile that everything must be much better now than before. We then see a peaceful and well-built city as proof that humanity has evolved. In a library, a young woman reads peacefully, showing how calm the new world is. That's why Kagura asks his friend to first enjoy this new place that has emerged. But the scientist's image begins to glitch, and he says that unfortunately he won't be able to. With an old man's smile, he adds that he won't be able to see everything through to the end. At that, the hologram's projection finally begins to disappear right in front of our hero. Kagura then leaves the world in Jin's hands, and the cube's message finally ends. The white-haired man says he understands as Hakam and Danpo run towards him. The girl then says she found him, and that everyone in the village was looking for him. They grab him and ask him to come back because the star of the show can't be late for the party. But the protagonist notices something shining on the girl's neck and looks curious. Zooming in, he realizes that it's an access key for the old laboratories. Jin then asks Hakama where she got that golden key pendant. The young woman explains that it was a gift from a great person to her clan and is a lucky charm. With a smile, he understands that's how she got into the forbidden place to find him. Being led by the two, the protagonist thinks that he now owes a great debt to her clan. Arriving at the village, the group encounters a large party around a giant bonfire. Some villagers then see the trio arriving and ask them to come closer. The people then wonder if that white-haired man is really the guardian god. One of the villagers doubts it and says he looks like an inferior species, and Jin just smiles. Sarlis overhears the conversation. Another warrior asks if that scrawny guy defeated the monster. With that, the cat-eared warrior gets up and angrily walks towards the villagers. He then yells at the cowards who ran away, and says that's why they didn't see what happened. Now everyone is in awe of the hero, and Hakama says they are different from earlier. Just then, the girl's father and grandmother approach the savior to talk to him. The old woman then thanks him once again on behalf of all the residents of that small village. Hakama's father says the village would have been gone without him, and that they want to return the favor. With a smile on his face, our protagonist tells them not to worry about such things, but he adds that if they insist, instead of goods, he prefers to receive information. Jin Shido says he wants to know the current and detailed state of how the world is functioning. Hakama's grandmother says that in that case, the best thing to do is to go to the great royal capital. That's where the king of the country called Kermosia resides, and many people from all over the world gather. In addition, the people of Kodama village also usually go there to sell their special products. The old woman warns that the journey is long and dangerous, but is sure he will be fine. Finally, she asks him to use Hakama as a guide, as the girl also has business in the capital. Hakama's grandmother explains that the young woman has divine power, and that in the capital, there is an academy for training. The next morning, a beautiful sunny day dawns on the village with birds singing in the blue sky. Inside a house, our white-haired hero says the morning is great and the air is pure. Looking at the landscape, he thinks he never imagined he could one day see such a beautiful scene. With a slightly sad look, the protagonist says he would have liked to show that to Kagura. Just then, little Shandy appears holding some clothes and shyly calls out to the guardian god. The boy then asks the white-haired man to get dressed, and he finally realizes the situation. Some time later, our protagonist and his new guide begin their journey to the capital. The grandmother then asks Hakama to fulfill her role as a guide, and the young woman nods in agreement. Sarlis says he wanted to go along, but the old woman tells him to shut up and study first. The hero then speaks to Sarlis and says his movements in yesterday's battle weren't bad. The warrior gets all excited and shouts that he will wait for him in the royal capital for a challenge. With everything settled, the girl's father asks the guardian god to take good care of his daughter on the trip. He then turns to Hakama and asks the young woman to take care of herself and stay healthy on the way. The hero and his new guide then say goodbye to everyone and finally begin their long journey. With that, the pair starts walking along a dirt road in the middle of a very green forest. We see the two follow in the path next to a river with crystal clear and calm waters. At dusk, they finally reach a beautiful waterfall and stop to rest. The girl then points to the horizon and seems to be showing him the rest of the way. At night, the two make camp and the hero asks Hakama how far the capital still is. Hakama replies that they need to walk for 4 more days, and the hero thinks that's close. With that, the pointy-eared girl asks why he wants to know so much about the world. Jin Shido answers mysteriously, just saying that it's a big secret. But he remembers that Kagura said the corruptors wouldn't be wiped out easily, and the protagonist confirms that this is a fact, as the creatures still exist in this era. However, he wonders how this is possible, as they only reproduce in polluted places. With a serious expression, the savior thinks that something is definitely changing. The young woman notices his face and he apologizes, saying he was just a little thoughtful. At least the white-haired man is happy to know that people haven't been dominated. So he decides that he will first investigate how the people of this era deal with the beasts. Leaving the corruptors for later, he asks Hakama to stop calling him guardian god. Suddenly, the sound of an approaching horse in the middle of the night interrupts their conversation. The noise gets louder and louder, and the two look towards the forest with curiosity. A mysterious voice then apologizes for interrupting their rest. Just then, a knight in armor and 2 female companions appear and ask for a moment of their attention. The blonde-haired young man with pointed ears stares at the protagonist with a very serious look. Unintimidated, the hero asks with a suspicious expression who that man is. The knight introduces himself as Argus Walton, the captain of the 7th Division of the Holy Knights. Jin Shido is confused by the name and wonders who these Holy Knights are. But one of Argus's companions gets a very angry look on her face upon hearing the question. The warrior gets annoyed with the hero's attitude and shouts at him to stand up and show respect. But Captain Argus tells his companion to stop and says with certainty that they are the ones he was looking for. The blonde then apologizes for the rudeness and asks if they can have a little chat. With that, Jin Shido stands up and questions what the knight meant by, "They are the ones." Argus then asks where the two came from and where they were going now. Hakama innocently replies that they came from Kodama village and are heading to the royal capital. Hearing the girl's answer, the female knight gives a wicked and confident smile. She then dismounts her horse and says that, as she thought, they are definitely the guilty ones. Drawing her sword, the woman says there are no records of inferior species in the village. The white-haired man is surprised to learn that they have records and are organized, but the captain simply says no and his companion is completely confused. Argus explains that the girl's clothes are a special and very expensive product from Kadama village. In addition, clothes for children are rare, so her story seems to be true. However, the blonde holds his sword and seems to be preparing for a new move. The captain then points his blade at the hero and says that he, on the other hand, is different. The knight questions where our protagonist's clothes are from, as he doesn't recognize them. The savior replies that on the road to the capital, there are bandits using children to rob people. Hakama panics and shouts that it's not them, but the knight says he will be the judge. Argus says the criminals pretend to be harmless to attack and points his sword. Seeing the situation, the little guy becomes completely terrified and doesn't know what to do. At that, Hakama prepares to fight and releases her divine power to defend herself from the attack. Captain Argus observes her with a serious and analytical gaze, noting all her skill. He then warns her not to try anything reckless as the young woman prepares to attack. The girl is surprised that he noticed she has divine power and finds her very promising. Our protagonist just watches the scene and understands that those are the holy knights. Argus then holds a type of crystal and realizes that his opponents are strong and dangerous. The knight points his sword at Jin Shedu and asks where he came from and what his destination is. He then threatens the newly awakened one, saying that depending on the answer, he will cut him down right there. Jin stares at the blade at his neck and remains silent for a brief moment, thinking. With a sigh, the hero calmly replies that he came from the small Kodama village. Argus's companion is completely shocked by the answer and shouts at the protagonist. But to her surprise, the captain sheathes his sword and says he understands the whole situation. With that, he turns to Hakama and asks if the young woman isn't by any chance lying to him. The girl confirms the story and asks if he is really the guardian deity of Kodama village. The blonde then seems to understand everything and repeats to himself that he is a guardian god. The knight then asks if they are done there, and our hero confirms that they are. Argus mounts his horse and apologizes, saying that was just part of the job. He then asks if Jin is going to the capital and says they will see each other again. The knight offers his help and asks the hero to forget the debt of 7 days. With that, the captain and his group leave, and his companion remains very annoyed. Our protagonist just watches the group ride away with a slight smile on his face. Meanwhile, the brown-haired female knight shouts at her captain, asking why he retreated. She says there's no doubt that the inferior species was suspicious and they should have attacked. Argus then repeats the term inferior species and becomes a little thoughtful about the matter. With a strange smile, he wonders which of them was the real inferior species there. The green-haired female knight agrees with him, and the other one gets angry for not understanding anything. With that, she turns and asks her companion if she didn't realize the truth. The female knight then explains that the power difference between them was simply massive. Argus reveals that he tried to attack our hero 3 times but couldn't do anything. He remembers the moment he pointed his sword at the newly awakened one's neck. At that moment, the captain's hand was trembling, and he seemed to have great difficulty maintaining his stance. Jin Shidu then released a bit of his energy to counter the knight's attack. The captain says he was neutralized before he could even try to make a move. The green-haired warrior asks if he used his divine power, and Argus confirms that he did. His companion is completely shocked because his power wasn't even activated. He explains that he attacked him in the same way he did with the girl, but the spirits didn't help him. The green-haired female knight also says the same thing happened to her, and her friend is astonished. Argus explains that there is a huge gap in their basic divine powers compared to him. And of all the holy knights, only the Grand Captain would be capable of doing something like that. With that, the 2 female warriors fall silent and continue their ride with a bored look. The brown-haired warrior gets annoyed and says she couldn't notice anything different. But Argus explains that he was an anomaly and that she had just joined the squad. He then asks if the corruptor from the village was defeated by him, and his friend confirms it. She asks if they can let him go, and the blonde says yes, as he doesn't seem to be a threat. With that, the other female warrior tells them to return to the capital, and that she will take care of everything. The captain then thinks about the guardian god and says that one needs more dignity than strength. At this, we see the great royal capital, and Argus thinks it would be good if he became an ally. With a serious look, the knight adds that he would be useful for the country's problems. The next day, the protagonist comments to his guide that he met someone interesting yesterday. Hakama then asks if all the knights there are that strong, but he denies it. The girl explains that among the knights, only the elite can join the holy knights. Jin Shida talks about the spirit magic, and she is amazed that he noticed the speed. With that, the young woman explains that divine power is borrowed from spirits to use magic. Our protagonist then understands that nanomachines are treated as spirits in this era. He comes to the conclusion that in this new era, the science he knew has become fantasy. With that, he remembers the warrior from before calling him an inferior species with disgust. The hero then repeats the term, and the girl stares at him with a confused look, not understanding. He then comments that there are various types of species, and Hakama nods in agreement. The young woman says some look like fish and others like insects, and the hero is astonished. She explains that her grandmother said a long time ago, living places were limited. That's why everyone changed their bodies to adapt to the places where they could live and survive. The protagonist is surprised and wonders if they adapted to the environment over time. At this, he thinks that some humans survived for 100 million years and evolved a lot. Jinshid then asks if those who didn't change are called inferior species, and the girl confirms it. She explains that they are inferior to those who adapted, and that's why the world sees them coldly. To make matters worse, the young woman reveals that many of this inferior species end up being sold as slaves. But Hakama says there isn't that much difference and finds it strange to treat someone badly just for being different. The white-haired man agrees with her and says with a serious look that everyone has gone mad. With a smile, the protagonist tells the young woman she is a good person, leaving her confused. Suddenly, a person runs deathly past the two and seems to be in trouble. They are startled by the situation, and a mysterious voice starts shouting for help in the middle of the road. At that, a blue-haired girl runs towards them but ends up tripping and falling to the ground. Akama then runs to help her and desperately asks if the blue-haired young woman is okay. Our white-haired protagonist just watches the scene with a serious and very analytical gaze. The girl then faints on the ground, and they realize she is completely injured and exhausted. But the hero notices something strange and sees that the girl's ears are not from any animal. She then lies on the ground, completely strengthless, with several wounds all over her body. Jinshid approaches and realizes her injuries are serious and she needs help soon. Hakama then holds her in her arms and keeps asking if the fainted young woman is okay. The savior then tells them to wait and prepares to use his power to heal the girl. But suddenly, the blue-haired young woman wakes up with a determined look and seems ready to attack. She then shouts for the protagonist not to move, and he just observes the situation calmly. At that, the girl takes Hakama hostage and threatens her with a knife, saying she will finish her. Our protagonist just watches the scene from a distance and seems to be analyzing everything carefully. With a slight smile, Jinshid says he understands and seems to have already figured out the whole plan. The young woman then asks with a mocking tone if her trap wasn't just perfect. The white-haired man then realizes that if this is a trap, the accomplices are nearby. Suddenly, an invisible figure starts to approach, and the hero is amazed by the ability. Just then, a man with a goatee appears and congratulates the blue-haired girl on a great job. The newcomer reveals himself as the leader of a group of bandits and talks about their camouflage. It's explained that this is a function of the nanomachines that makes them almost transparent in the air. The group then surrounds our hero, and the leader asks which country that inferior species came from. Next, the bandit points his sword at Jin's neck and tells him not to move. The leader threatens him, saying he knows what happens if he disobeys, and Hakama shouts for Jin. With that, Hakama releases her divine power, and the blue-haired girl shouts, annoyed with the situation. Our protagonist then shouts his guide's name and seems to be trying to stop her somehow. Hakama continues to be held by the kidnapper and seems very scared of what might happen. The savior then calmly says that this power was not meant to be pointed at people. Hakama tries to respond, but the blue-haired young woman tightens her arm around her neck even more. At this, the bandit leader is surprised and celebrates finding someone with divine power. One of the henchmen asks if the hero can also use this power, and Jin gives him a mocking look. Without a second thought, the bandit tries to grab our protagonist's arm with great force. Then, the henchman attacks him with a knee strike and arrogantly calls him an inferior species. But the group leader stops him, saying not to ruin the merchandise as he's not worth much. The man with the goatee adds that an inferior species would never have divine power. At this, Hakama realizes they are the bandits the Holy Knight had mentioned before. Angered, the leader uses an electric power and says it's time for the two of them to get some sleep. The girl panics because she knows that if she's captured, she will surely be sold in the market. Suddenly, everything goes dark and the savior calls out for Hakama, asking his guide to finally wake up. The young woman then wakes up startled and realizes they are both trapped inside a cage. Jinshid asks if she is okay, and the girl confirms, saying she's fine. The protagonist then looks around and asks where they are, seeing other people trapped. He explains that this place is the base of the bandits who attacked them in the forest earlier. It also seems that other people who were also attacked are trapped there with them. In another cage, we see two men completely bruised and with their clothes all torn. In a cell next to them, a green-haired girl with pointed ears trembles with fear, curled up. With that, the two remain silent for a moment and observe the place very carefully. Hakama then asks why he is without his clothes, and the hero explains that they were stolen. The girl says he is very calm, and the savior replies that he has spent his life almost without clothes. But the young woman changes the subject and asks why he didn't react to the bandits' attack. She says he could have easily beaten them, and Jin just stays silent for a moment. Outside, two guards are talking, and one of them tells the other to just get it over with. With that, the hero and his guide continue to sit in the cell, watching the bandits' movements. The blue-haired girl then appears with a plate of food and is surprised that they are awake. Hakama gets angry at the traitor, and the young woman tells her to hate her all she wants, as she doesn't care. The kidnapper says she doesn't expect to be forgiven, because she never thought she would be from the start. Even hearing this, the pointy-eared young woman remains very angry and grabs the cell bars. But to her surprise, the protagonist says that she is actually very kind, leaving her confused. She then repeats the word kind and thinks that a real villain wouldn't act that way. Jin explains that real villains don't waste time thinking about whether they are hated or forgiven by someone. With that, the white-haired man stands up and seems to be preparing to finally take action. Effortlessly, he simply bends the iron bars of the cage using only his hands. The blue-haired girl is completely shocked and speechless at the absurd strength he showed. Once outside, he turns to the young woman, and she still can't believe what she just saw. The hero says he was waiting for her so they could talk without anyone listening, and Hakama is confused. He then asks the traitor where the important person to her, who is being held hostage, is. The young woman asks how he knows that, and the hero calmly replies that it was just a hunch. While healing her, he says that at first he was fooled because her injuries were all real. But the savior explains that not even a villain would use an ally to cause such serious injuries. That's why he realized right away that she was only following them because of some kind of blackmail. The blue-haired girl is completely speechless and stares at the situation with a look of pure astonishment. The hero then asks if the hostage is her brother, and the young woman nods yes. In a flashback, we see that the bandits said they would sell her brother to some traders. With that, she realized they would be separated forever and fell into complete despair. The young woman then reveals that her parents were defeated, and that's why she needs to protect her brother. Hearing the whole story, Hakama just observes the situation in silence and seems very thoughtful. Our white-haired protagonist has a look of pure hatred and calls them trash. Hakama then asks if he let himself be captured on purpose, and he says that was part of it. The savior explains that villains are stubborn and persistent like oil stains, and the guy doesn't understand. He says that if one escapes, he will spread his influence elsewhere and cause more problems. That's why if you're going to finish them, it's better to do it all at once, leaving no trace. Suddenly, Jin kicks the cell door, and the guard who was there is thrown far away by the force of the impact. Our protagonist then stands at the entrance of the cell and stares outside with a serious look. With a dark aura, he says it's necessary to pull everything out by the roots, and very completely. Then we are taken to a flashback showing a futuristic city 100 million years ago. We see several flying cars and buildings illuminated by neon lights on a rainy night. At that, a boy with black hair and blue eyes appears with his face all bruised and dirty. On television, he saw a hero who unmasked an organization, and because of that he longed for justice. The boy then stands on a dark and foggy street, seeming to be waiting for something. But he soon realized the truth when a man in dress shoes stopped right in front of him. He thought that a world that needs justice is a very complicated place to live in. This kind of world is always full of people who are like trash and don't care about anything. A bandit grabs him by the collar, and he thinks that if he could live normally, nothing would be better. But the environment he lived in at that time simply didn't allow that to happen. So, without hesitation, the young boy decides to fight back and attacks the bandit with all his strength. The only solution he found was to simply overwhelm all of his enemies without mercy. And that's exactly what he did, and he started fighting against all the bandits in the city. Over time, he continued his journey and faced increasingly stronger and more dangerous enemies. Older now, he continued his hunt and sat on a pile of bodies he himself had defeated. But one day, a mysterious man appeared and found him in the midst of all those bodies on the ground. Our protagonist just stares at the man in silence and seems to be listening very attentively. The scientist then extends his hand and says that the young hero was born in the completely wrong world. Back in the present, Jin drags one of the unconscious guards across the floor using only one hand. Just then, two other henchmen appear and desperately shout for him to stop that right now. A short time later, all the guards are on the ground, and one of them asks what his objective is. Another fallen henchman asks where he came from, and how he managed to get in there. Our white-haired protagonist just gives a wicked smile and prepares to continue. He then throws one of the guards towards the others with completely absurd force. One of the henchmen manages to catch his companion, and is shocked by the force of the throw. In the blink of an eye, the hero passes them and attacks the last guard who is still standing. The henchman manages to catch his companion, and is shocked by the absurd force of the throw. Jin stands with his back turned and faces the bandit leader, who shouts and asks who the heck he is. The man with the goatee remains on the ground, completely paralyzed and not understanding the situation. Suddenly, a loud scream echoes through the place, and all the other prisoners are startled. The blue-haired girl then realizes whose scream it is, and gets a little worried. The young woman asks who her partner is, and Akama replies that he is a guardian god. With a confident smile, the girl says that if they leave everything to Jin, it will be all right. Hakama tells everyone to leave, and the other young woman asks if they will really be saved by him. She remembers the leader and says he has a strong divine power and they can't win by force. Seeing the situation, the bandit leader despairs and shouts for our hero to wait. The savior holds a henchman's head, and the leader asks if he's looking for money. The man with the goatee then gives a wicked smile and seems to have a very strange idea. He then points to a cage and asks if the protagonist is looking for slaves. The bandit says he can give him whatever he wants, and we see that the girl's brother is in the cage. Our protagonist just observes the situation with a look of pure disgust and disinterest. With a cold look, the hero asks if he's done talking while a bandit stares at him. The leader is completely speechless and wonders what the heck is happening there. He then questions why his spirit magic isn't working against the intruder. With a look of panic, he realizes that this guy is different from everyone he has ever faced. The white-haired man says it helps that he's just a half-baked villain. He explains that real villains run away immediately, and the bandit gets a fearful look on his face. Jin continues, saying that people like him first underestimate their opponent and think they will win. But when he's about to lose, the bandit tries to flatter the enemy, and the man with the goatee gets angry. Seeing that he has no other choice, the group leader decides it's time to put his plan into action. He then runs towards a lever and shouts that the battle isn't over yet. The man with the goatee then manages to pull the lever, and a large gate begins to open. Behind the large iron door, a bizarre and muscular creature is trapped in a dark cage. Our protagonist stares at the beast, and the bandit explains that it was acquired at someone's request. The monster then breaks the cage, and the leader says that if flattery doesn't work, he can't help it. With a wicked smile, the man with the goatee seems very confident in the power of that creature. He then shouts to our hero that he will completely finish him using his secret weapon. Without hesitation, the creature charges forward and prepares a powerful punch to hit the protagonist. But Jin Shidu just stares at the attack with his eyes glowing, showing no fear. To everyone's surprise, the hero manages to stop the monster's blow using only his hands. The bandit leader is completely in shock and can't believe what just happened. Jin explains that he was born with what they would call a superhuman and very strong constitution. He reveals that he seems to have many times more muscle fibers than a normal human being. With that, the protagonist lands a powerful punch right in the middle of the bizarre creature's stomach. Next, Jin says that against an intruder, he won't hold back and begins to release his power. Clasping his hands together, he fires an immense blast of energy using all his divine power. The attack obliterates the creature, and the bandit leader falls to the ground, completely terrified. Jin then approaches and asks if he can't even use divine power to protect himself. With a serious look, the white-haired protagonist faces him and asks what he's going to do now. Completely cornered and sweating, the man with the goatee begins to beg for mercy. But with a desperate smile, he asks if the savior won't let him leave. The hero responds with a simple no and then lands a powerful punch on the bandit's face. After that, he finally gets his clothes back and begins to dress calmly and peacefully. With his coat on, he says he got his clothes back while the villain stares at him. He then turns to the cage and apologizes to the children for making them wait. He promises he will get them all out of there, and the little hostages are filled with hope and joy. But before that, he goes to a table and says he needs to investigate some things first. With that, the newly awakened one opens a small wooden box and finds a key and a document. Looking at the papers, he realizes that it all seems very suspicious and is intrigued. Zooming in, we see that the document is written in a strange and indecipherable language. The savior gives a slight smile, and it seems he has finally understood the whole situation. But to our surprise, he says he has no idea what is written on those papers. With that, he decides he will have to ask a comma to teach him how to read the language of that world. He then turns to the monster's remains and wonders what they wanted by capturing the intruder. Jin says he will find out the truth and places his hand on the remains of the bizarre creature. Then he accesses the cameras of the area's nanomachines to see what really happened. He then says there should be a record if the footage is from the last week and starts watching. With a serious and determined look, our white-haired protagonist continues watching the past. At that, a nobleman asks what he intends to do, and the man replies that he doesn't need to know. With a wicked smile, the mysterious man says that nevertheless, he will tell him one thing. He then reveals with a sinister look that something very interesting is going to happen in this country. The savior finishes watching the recording and has a serious look, thinking about everything he discovered. Sometime later, the group finally arrives in a city, and everyone seems to be calmer. The ex-prisoners then gather in the middle of the street and seem to be waiting for something. Hakam and the blue-haired girl watch as the bandits are taken away by the city guards. The blue-haired young woman then turns and seems to have seen something important in the distance. At that, little Nito runs towards her, shouting for his dear older sister. With tears in her eyes, the girl then prepares to finally hug her lost brother. The two then embrace and cry with joy at finally being able to reunite again. She then thanks the hero, calling him a god, and he replies that he is not a god and it's okay. The white-haired man then changes the subject and seems to have a question about the situation. He asks who is arresting the bandits, and Hakama says they are from the guild and she called them. The young woman then points to a man with horns and says he is the city's guild master. The guild master then looks at the group with a serious expression and seems to be analyzing everyone. The man approaches and asks if the protagonist was responsible, and he confirms it. The master then introduces himself as Padrak and thanks our hero for all the cooperation. The horned man then stares at the newly awakened one with a serious and very analytical gaze. He thinks that Jin doesn't have a scratch, and that although he looks like an inferior species, he is different. Padrak concludes that he is no ordinary man and says there were many reports about the bandits. The savior asks why the local lord didn't arrest them, and the master says he can't. It's explained that only guild members who have sworn loyalty to the king can handle it. Padrak adds that even if Lord Chapin committed a crime, they would report him. With that, the protagonist understands that the lord is like a mayor and the guild is like the police. He then thinks of the name Chapin and remembers the suspicious nobleman he saw in the earlier recording. The hero hands the document he found to the master and asks if it could be useful. Padrak is shocked and reveals that the paper is a list of those who did business with the bandits. The savior asks if they can arrest everyone with it and if the Lord's name is on the list, but the master denies it and tells him not to take the joke seriously, and Jin thinks he's a villain. He knows he can't do anything now, and before he leaves, he looks at the blue-haired young woman. The hero asks what will happen to the slaves, and Padrak says the guild will help. But for those who don't fit into the categories, they can't do anything, and Jin looks at the siblings. Our protagonist believes the two have lost their parents and asks if there are no shelters. Padrak replies that there aren't, but they can help find them a job. However, since the two are inferior species, he thinks it will be difficult to find employment. The white-haired man sighs and thinks that the prejudice against inferior species exists there too. He wants to do something to help the two but realizes they have nowhere to go or work. But suddenly the protagonist has an idea and tells them to wait a bit. He asks if they would go to a place where they could work, and the young woman confirms it. With a slight smile, the white-haired man says he has a place in mind. At that, he remembers the night Argus telling to look for him if he needed any help. The hero then says with a mischievous smile that he knows a very special workplace. With that, we are taken to the royal capital, to the grand and luxurious estate of the knight Argus. Suddenly, the noble knight feels a strange shiver and is a little scared by the sensation. His companion asks if something is wrong, and he says it's nothing, and he just felt a chill. The group of knights continues their ride towards their captain's grand estate. Arriving at the location, Argus says goodbye to his companions and says they've gone far enough. The blonde thanks them for their work on the expedition and tells everyone to rest well on their day off. With that, the holy knight enters his mansion and is greeted by two of his butlers. All the maids and staff bow and welcome the great Lord Argus. The knight then asks his butler if there is any important news for him. The man and one of the maids get a worried and slightly embarrassed look at the question. Argus notices their strange reaction and with a sigh asks if something bad happened. The butler apologizes for bothering him, and the knight replies that it's no problem. With that, the man approaches and begins to whisper something in his noble master's ear. The two then begin to walk through the grand hall while talking about what happened. But from a balcony, a young blonde-haired woman watches the two with a very angry and serious look. The noble knight thanks him for the report, and the butler says it was just his duty as a servant. With his hand on his head, Argus realizes that the situation in the capital is much worse than he imagined. He wonders how invaders appeared in the royal capital, and where they managed to get in. With a serious look, the blonde knight concludes that someone must have let them in on purpose. In that case, the most suspicious place would be Harnisk Academy, as entry there is super restricted. The nobleman then thinks that either way, he will need an ally as soon as possible. 3 days pass, and we see the protagonist group traveling towards the great royal capital. The blue-haired girl asks if she will really get a job, and the hero tells her to relax. He says that since she knows how to read, write, and do math, she will definitely find something. With a smile, the young woman is encouraged by the savior's words and thanks him for his confidence. Suddenly, Hakama points to the horizon and shouts excitedly, saying they have finally arrived. Jin Shido then looks ahead with a surprised expression upon seeing their destination in the distance. Before the group is the immense royal capital, and the hero stares at it for the first time amazed. The city is full of life, with many people and buildings with very different architecture. The protagonist comments that the place is full of life, and the children are impressed with everything. Hakama then explains that the capital runs on imports, and that's why everything ends up there. She adds that even the people of Kodama come to sell, and Jin remembers her saying that. The white-haired man is fascinated to see a great mix of different races and cultures. He realizes how that place has evolved in a unique and different way from anything he'd ever seen. Hakama adds that the streets are impeccable, and we see a shop full of various items. She also says that the law and order in the capital seem to be very solid and safe. But the white-haired protagonist gets a serious and somewhat thoughtful look. He notices a guard mistreating two people with fishtails in a dark alley. With that, he thinks that every new era also comes with its own problems and baggage. Jin Shida then asks Sakama when the academy's exam will be, and she says it's next week. A young blonde woman observes them, and the hero is relieved that classes only start with the results. With a look of disgust, the blonde girl wonders about those brats and half-breeds. After a long day, the group finally arrives at an inn to rest. Hakama and little Nino then throw themselves on the bed, excited to finally have a place. The hero says they finally got a real bed, and everyone happily agrees. With that, he thinks that now that they've arrived in the capital, comes the million-dollar question. Holding a bag of coins, the savior remembers that living in that world requires a lot of money. Hakama holds the reward from the bandits, but he knows it won't last after being divided. And on top of everything, he still needs to get a job for the two siblings he rescued. The protagonist thinks that tracking down Argus would be the shortcut, but without an invitation, he can't get past. With his hand on his chin, the white-haired man becomes thoughtful and analyzes all the options. He wonders if he should first investigate the corruptors of this new era to understand. The newly awakened one remembers that there are already people trying to use the creatures for dirty work. Jin concludes that the corruptors are a great threat, and he can't just ignore them. With a serious and determined look, the protagonist stares out the window, looking very focused. He then affirms with conviction that he will not let history repeat itself as it did before. With that, the hero asks Sakama how people there usually research something. The girl explains that books are expensive, and in her village they had to share them among everyone. But she reveals that the capital has a library where he can find what he's looking for. The white-haired man repeats the word library, and seems to have really liked the idea. With a smile, he says this is useful, and he might even find a clue about Kagura's laboratory. But upon arriving at the location, a librarian with glasses says that's out of the question for them. She explains that the books are national treasures and entry is not allowed for just anyone. The woman reveals that entry is restricted to students, staff, and the local nobility of the city. Hakama then remembers that Jin doesn't know how to read, and he confirms that he is still illiterate in the language. He says he's learning the alphabet, but it will take time until he can understand a whole page. With his hand on his face, the protagonist gets frustrated and wonders what he can do now. Suddenly, two hooded men call him trash and seem to be looking for trouble. The white-haired man then turns and asks if they can talk for a second. Without hesitation, one of the men with wolf ears charges and tries to punch the protagonist, but the hero easily stops the blow with just one of his gloved hands. With an ironic smile, he comments on the reception and says he thought the streets were safe. The attacker replies that he thought wrong and continues to force his attack against our hero. The savior stares at the man with a serious look, and a golden light begins to shine in his hand. With that, he releases a small wave of energy and throws the attacker far away with the impact. The attack explodes in a bright light in the sky, and the people on the street are completely shocked. The wolf-eared man then lands and compliments his opponent's instincts with a smile. The blue-haired girl is frightened and thinks they are using divine power in broad daylight. Our protagonist then asks what they want, and the attacker replies that someone hates him. With a serious look, the white-haired man realizes that this is some kind of hired attack. But with a slight smile, he thinks that this whole situation is actually perfect for him. The attacker threatens him, and the savior replies that he only worries when he's in real danger. The wolf-eared man gets angry and charges to attack again with all his strength. But to his surprise, the hero manages to catch his fist with ease once again. In a swift move, Jin twists the attacker's arm and throws him to the street floor. Seeing this, his companion gets angry and starts to gather a large fireball in his hands. The red-haired man then launches his attack, and the protagonist calmly faces the magic. But with a simple hand gesture, he creates a wind barrier and dissipates the entire fire attack. In the blink of an eye, Jin appears right in front of the attacker, who is shocked by the speed. The newly awakened one then grabs him by the collar of his clothes with a serious and very determined look. He then tells the young man to come back when he's strong enough to be a real threat. With an intimidating look, the protagonist adds for him to come back if he has the courage. The young man is terrified and realizes that this man is by no means an inferior species. Suddenly, a mysterious voice shouts for everyone to stop and tells no one to move from there. A female knight appears and complains that they are making a scene in the middle of her day off. The knight points her spear and says she will take them all to the city prison. With a smile on his face, Jin thinks that his plan to attract attention has finally worked. At this, the knight gets angry and recognizes our hero as the inferior species from before. She then faces the protagonist in the middle of the street with a look of pure rage and contempt. With a wicked smile on her face, the warrior seems ready to finally attack. The knight then accuses him of causing a big commotion as soon as he arrived in the capital. She adds that an inferior species will always be an inferior species with no salvation. But an old woman from the crowd approaches and says he was suddenly attacked by them. The old woman then adds that everything that happened there was just self-defense. The warrior then looks at the attacker on the ground and realizes his face is very familiar. With that, she approaches and asks if they are students of the famous Harness Academy. The knight gets frustrated and hopes that the young miss is not involved in this. The hero asks about the young woman, but the warrior tells him not to worry and to take them away. With a smile, he comments that the Holy Knights also patrol the city. She replies that the capital is huge and they just help maintain local public order. But the warrior continues with a serious and slightly suspicious look at our protagonist. In her thoughts, she concludes that this guy is very strong because the students were not weak. With that, the knight says goodbye and asks him not to cause any more trouble in the capital. But the savior interrupts her and says that if she doesn't mind, he has a place to show her. The warrior then turns confused and asks what kind of place he wants to show her. We are taken to the grand and luxurious estate of the knight Argus on a starry night. Inside, our white-haired protagonist asks the blonde knight to hire them. Argus is completely shocked, and Jin reminds him that he said to look for him if he needed help. The knight then asks why his group has grown, and the hero replies that it just happened. The savior explains that he found the bandits and rescued the children who were prisoners. The blonde then asks about the bandits, and the hero says he left the rest to the guild members. With his hand on his chin, the nobleman wonders if the protagonist took care of all that by himself. The knight asks why he is helping the two, and Jin says they have no family and are inferior. With that, the newly awakened one says he thought of at least finding a place for them to work. The nobleman says he has no obligation, and the savior replies that this is his way of doing things. He says he was the one who saved them, and so he won't do a half-hearted job and will see it through to the end. Hearing this, the knight and his companion are completely shocked by his determination. The two siblings then look at their savior with shining eyes full of hope. With that, the knight agrees and says the two can work there as servants, and the girl gets excited. However, the blonde-haired nobleman reveals that there is a small condition for them to stay. He then points to the hero and says he wants him as an instructor, and the protagonist is astonished. We then see the two siblings in their new work clothes, looking very happy and excited. The white-haired man then comments with a smile that they look great in the new clothes. The blue-haired young woman then thanks Lord Argus, but he says there's no need to thank him. He then leaves the two's education to his butler and asks him not to discriminate against them for being inferior. With that, the siblings happily say goodbye and thank the hero once again for his great help. The protagonist then realizes there is a hidden motive, and the knight appreciates his perceptiveness. Argus says he doesn't know where he came from, but wants to trust him and make a very important request. The nobleman then asks the white-haired man to infiltrate the Great Harness Academy. Not understanding, the newly awakened one asks what the Holy Knight meant by that. The blonde explains that various factions are trying to take over the country, and Jin asks about the king. Argus reveals that the king is very ill, and so a battle for succession has already begun. The problem is that people with no right to the throne are planning to take the country for themselves. To make matters worse, they are using the corruptors and dragging innocent people into the chaos. Jin remembers the suspicious nobleman and understands that he is not the only one he should worry about. The knight confirms that dangerous people are operating the capital and need to be stopped. The savior asks if the academy is the most suspicious place, and Argus confirms that it definitely is. With everything explained, the nobleman knocks on a nearby door and says they are coming in. He then opens the door and says that the person inside will be his guide within the academy. The knight introduces his younger sister who studies at the academy and is named Milia Oltens. Argus then tries to introduce our protagonist to the young blonde woman who looks at him with contempt. But the girl interrupts him and asks if he's going to leave the infiltration to that inferior species. Annoyed, the blonde tells his sister to show respect, but she says his presence is a disrespect. Milia adds that this is not a job that can be entrusted to an inferior species. With a smile, the hero calls her a prejudiced young lady and Argus apologizes for the rudeness. With a smile, the female knight gets annoyed, and the hero says she has her own prejudices too. The young blonde woman then looks at her brother and asks if he finally got the message. She says that this is not just an infiltration and that he also needs to fulfill his duty as an instructor. Milia adds that she doesn't believe an inferior species is capable of serving as an instructor. But Hakama reveals that Jin doesn't know how to read, and the hero gets annoyed that she told the secret. The young blonde-haired woman says that is completely out of the question and seems decided. With that, Hakama defends the protagonist and says he is much more amazing than all of them combined. The noblewoman is silent for a moment and looks at the white-haired man with suspicion. She then admits that he at least has the necessary strength to keep the students in line. But the girl adds that to be an instructor, you need much more than brute force. Seeing the young woman's stubbornness, the blonde knight puts his hand on his face in complete frustration. Argus's companion then realizes that the students from before were sent by the spoiled noblewoman. The knight apologizes and says he will talk to her, but the hero says it's okay. With that, the protagonist asks what he should teach, and Argus replies that it's spirit magic. The nobleman explains that from what he can see, the newly awakened one is very skilled with this magic. Jin asks what part of the magic he should teach, and Argus replies that just the basics are enough. He explains that if the hero teaches ignition, discharge, freezing, and healing, it's more than enough. But the white-haired man asks if that's all, and the knight is shocked by the question. Argus then asks if he also uses special magic, and the protagonist is a little confused. The hero remembers the bandit and wonders if he was considered exceptional in this new era. With a smile on his face, Jin Shida finds the whole situation very interesting and exciting. Then he says it's time to turn the common sense of this era a little upside down. Suddenly, an academy professor appears in the courtyard and sees the hero standing there calmly. With a look of pure hatred, the instructor glares at the protagonist, looking very annoyed with the situation. But the savior just gestures with his hand and releases a small blast of energy towards him. With that, the professor is thrown to the ground and is completely confused about what just happened. The man then shouts and asks what the heck the newly awakened one just did to him. He says he has never seen magic like that and accuses Jin of using some kind of dirty trick. Meanwhile, the other instructors just watch the scene from a distance with a very serious look. With a smile, Argus says that resolves everything, and his companions agree with him. The other students watching the scene from afar are completely shocked by what they saw. Milia is also speechless, and one of the students says that was definitely special magic. She wonders why that happened, as inferior species shouldn't have any power. The young blonde woman then glares at the protagonist with a look of pure suspicion and a lot of anger. With that, the hero grabs the professor and asks him to calm down and stop all the fuss. A week passes and the academy teaches normal subjects, but its real purpose is very different. In fact, the true goal of that place is to train warriors to fight against the beasts. Those who can't keep up will be forced to leave the academy without any mercy. But if they manage to graduate, joining the Holy Knights will not be just a dream. In the end, she adds that everything will depend on the skill of each one of them there. Two students comment that there are many freshmen, and most seem to be commoners. At that, a hand approaches the noblewoman, and a mysterious voice calls her for a conversation. A red-haired young man named Reyes says it's rare for her to appear at the entrance ceremony. The young woman replies that he is also there to try to get close to some famous noble. But suddenly, the red-haired student notices something and is surprised by what he sees. He asks why an inferior species is with the instructors, and Milia says he is one of them. Reyes is completely shocked, and the blonde girl asks for his opinion on the man. With a look of astonishment, the young man is speechless and doesn't know what to answer the young woman. Milia then says he's just an inferior species, and that was exactly what she thought. The protagonist just watches the scene from afar and realizes the two are talking about him. He thinks the academy is huge and investigating it all will definitely take some time. The hero notices the stairs and concludes that he first needs to erase the image of an inferior species. For him, the most important thing now is to gain the recognition of everyone in that place. We then see the large and imposing academy on a beautiful sunny day with a very blue sky. In a classroom, the professor says they will restart the spirit magic classes. The instructor warns the elite students to be careful and not let their guard down with the newcomers. But with a wicked smile, the man says he would like to say that, but the situation is different. He notices that there are few students and asks if they really have any motivation to study. With her arms crossed, the young blonde woman calmly replies that of course they are motivated. With an ironic smile, the professor wonders who would want to listen to an inferior species speak. He reveals that today's class will be given by an inferior species and that he spread the news beforehand. The professor then mockingly asks our protagonist to introduce himself to the class. With a confident smile, the newly awakened one introduces himself to everyone as Shido Jin. He then says he will teach spirit magic and hopes to work well with the students. But the red-haired student asks if he can really handle that job. The white-haired man replies with a smile that it's up to the students to decide. He adds that if they think it's not worth it, they can simply skip class. But with a serious look, the savior says there is one thing he wants everyone to follow. Surrounded by blue energy, he asks them never to use that power against people. It is explained that spirit magic can stop the incredible regeneration of the corruptors. However, this ability does not work on humans and will only cause normal injuries. With a serious look, the protagonist reveals that this power was created to defeat the beasts. Therefore, he asks the students not to use that power incorrectly or recklessly. But one of the students starts to laugh and calls him stupid, because power is always power. He says he came to see an inferior species class, and the hero forbids them from using the magic. Other students also begin to mock him and call him an inferior species without power. With that, the whole class starts to laugh and mock the new instructor without respect. Even hearing everything, our white-haired protagonist remains very calm. He then challenges the student and says that if he thinks the hero has no power, he can try. The savior adds for the young man to use his strongest power and shoot at him. He then promises that if the boy manages to hurt him, he will no longer appear in today's class. With a confident smile, the student seems to really like the proposal he just heard. The young man then gathers a golden energy and shouts for the inferior species not to regret it. At this, the professor panics and shouts for the student to stop because he will also be hit. But the student doesn't care, and with a shout, he finally launches his attack with all he has. A large blast of golden energy is fired towards our white-haired protagonist. The attack then hits the ground and causes a large explosion of smoke and dust in the classroom. With a victorious smile on his face, the student seems very satisfied with the result of his attack. But suddenly, a stake of bluish energy emerges from the middle of the smoke at very high speed. The attack grazes the young man's face and hits the wall right behind him with force. The student is completely in shock and can't believe what just happened right in front of him. The savior then says that if he had wanted, that attack would have finished the boy in an instant. He adds that judging people just by their appearance can end up being a fatal mistake. The red-haired student is speechless and wonders if that was also spirit magic. Jin asks if he was called inferior for being inferior, but since the hero is stronger, so what should they call him? And the white-haired man says he will give the answer. With a confident smile, he states that the right answer is simply professor. The other professor then asks if the newly awakened one knows the conditions to activate the magic. But the protagonist just points to the student and asks if he attacked him and tells the young man to answer. The student is confused and replies that it's just a matter of visualization and doesn't understand. The student explains that to use divine power, you just have to imagine the force and project it onto the spirits to manifest it. Our protagonist smiles and says that visualization is important, but it's not the condition to activate the magic for real. He reveals that the spirits, or nanomachines, need to receive a specific frequency to release their power. The student is confused, and Jin explains that there are actually 8 types of fundamental frequencies to use. With that, he begins to demonstrate the first type, which is fire magic, creating a flame in the palm of his hand. Next, the savior shows the second, which is lightning, concentrating electric energy around his fist. The third magic the hero demonstrates to the class is wind, with green energy coming from his hand. Finally, he shows ice magic and says that up to that point, the student should already know the elements. But to everyone's surprise, the protagonist says that besides these elements, there are other types of magic. He then reveals gravity manipulation and creates a floating purple energy sphere in his hand. Then he shows light intensity manipulation, creating a white and very bright ball of energy. The next power is atmospheric pressure manipulation, and he says he still has what he showed before. With a smile, he shows spatial protection and creates a floating blue energy cube in front of him. Seeing that, the other professor despairs and shouts, asking if he can use 8 types of magic. Our hero explains that to apply the basics, visualization is the key, like turning a discharge into a spear. With a confident smile on his face, the new academy instructor seems ready to really begin. Then, with his arms crossed, he faces the students and mockingly asks if the class can begin. After class, the white-haired man walks through the academy's corridors with a very serious expression. He thinks he needs to investigate the place, but notices that the other professor continues to watch him from a distance. The protagonist then realizes that there are students everywhere, and he can't find anything suspicious. He then thinks he needs to find a place where students are not allowed in order to investigate. With a serious look, the white-haired protagonist seems to already have an idea of what he's going to do. But the young blonde woman continues to stare at him with suspicion and seems to be analyzing the new instructor. With that, she confronts him and asks with a serious voice who he really is. He then turns to her, and the girl admits that he is not a normal person like the others. The noblewoman adds that an inferior species could never use all types of magic. The savior says he taught it in class and that anyone can use it if they can switch the frequencies. She says that if it were possible, he wouldn't be drawing so much attention and other students watch. With that, the white-haired man suggests they go somewhere else, and the young blonde woman follows him. The two then walk down an empty corridor with large pillars and old windows on the side. The girl then turns to him and asks if the new instructor will finally answer her questions. The hero says he is an ancient human who slept for 100 million years, and the young woman thinks it's a joke. With a serious look, the noblewoman asks what he did 100 million years ago in the past. The protagonist replies that he did many things and that at that time, he was a type of agent. The girl is confused, and he explains that he was someone who worked hard for his country and his people. With a slight smile on his face, he adds that he fought against countless different villains. In a flashback from 100 million years ago, we see a young Jin with his companions in a laboratory. Kagura then appears explaining an attack strategy to the soldiers on a whiteboard. The savior says he remembers everything as if it were yesterday, and we see him on a mission. With a weapon in his hand, the young Jin runs through a large explosion during his agent mission. With a smile, the white-haired man says that all of that is very nostalgic and remembers his past. The noblewoman then asks how someone like him ended up sleeping for so long, and the hero replies that he failed. He reveals that he was arrogant and thought he could handle everything completely alone without help. But as a result, the protagonist ended up losing everything he had without being able to do anything to stop the tragedy. He says he accepted the job so that if he needed to, he could count on her help and that of the other students. The young woman then asks where they are going, and he replies that he is just fulfilling his duty as a guide. With that, the two arrive in a dark and dusty room that seems to have been abandoned for a long time. The noblewoman then explains that this is the place where instructors store materials for classes. Our protagonist then asks with his hand on his chin if that place is just a storage room. He then looks at a dusty bookshelf and notices a small old statue sitting there. The girl asks why they are there and reveals that she has also been doing her own secret investigation. She then shows a map and says there is an abnormal space next to the large room, big enough for another. The young woman believes that if there is something suspicious, it's in that location, and Jin moves the old statue from the shelf. With that, the bookshelf moves, revealing a secret passage with a dark and gloomy staircase. Facing the passage, the hero praises the girl and says her deduction was completely right about the place. The noblewoman then asks how he knew and points out that, although everything was covered in dust, something was strange. He explains that this specific spot was clean and that he also used a bit of intuition from experience. The savior says he's going in to check and tells her to wait, but the young woman insists she's going with him. He warns that it's dangerous and there might be a corruptor, but the girl tells him not to underestimate her for being a noble. She proudly says that her grades are the best and that her skills are no less than her brother's. With a smile, he says it's okay and that he will trust the young noblewoman's ability and her judgment. He then creates a sphere of light, and the two begin to descend the dark staircase together carefully. The path seems very deep, and the noblewoman comments on how convenient light manipulation is for them there. The hero thinks the place looks like a fantasy game, and the girl doesn't understand what he meant. With that, she changes the subject and remembers the conversation about him facing villains in his past. The noblewoman asks if he already has a suspect, and he thinks she's asking for a lot on their first day. Even so, he seems thoughtful and with his hand on his chin, calmly and attentively analyzes the situation. The savior then reveals that perhaps Professor Rodman is involved in everything that is happening. He says the professor is calm, but when he's not talking, his mind seems to be far away. It's a trait of people forced to do something, and he is also always on the defensive for no reason. The girl says she thought Professor Gilda was suspicious, but the hero thinks she couldn't do anything. Her emotions are easy to read, and she is not two-faced, so deep down, she must be a good person. The white-haired man continues to light the way while the noblewoman watches him in silence. After descending completely, they finally arrive in a long, misty corridor in the basement. The young blonde woman is surprised and says she never imagined such a large space under the academy. Suddenly, he stops, and the girl asks what it is and if he found something strange there. With a shocked face, he says he never thought he would find that in a place like this. Before them is the door to one of the research laboratories that Kagura left around the world. With a serious look, the protagonist faces the gate and confirms it's a laboratory of his friend. He then notices that the door is protected by nanomachines and has no doubt about it. The noblewoman is completely shocked and wonders how such a large door ended up under the academy. With that, the girl asks if they can open it, and the hero explains that it normally requires an access key. The young woman is confused by the term, and the protagonist explains that it's like a key to unlock the gate. The white-haired man then becomes thoughtful and seems to be remembering something important. He remembers that Hakama inherited the key and thinks that someone from here must have inherited the other one. With a serious look, the savior realizes that if that's the case, he doesn't need to worry about it. He then places his hand on the door, and a system confirms Jin-level access and unlocks the gate. With a sound of creaking metal, the large and heavy laboratory gate finally begins to open. The protagonist then realizes that the person Kyaokyao's in the country is the one with the access key. When the gate opens, they find a huge place full of corruptors trapped in cages. The young blonde woman is completely terrified by the scene and can't believe that is under the academy. She then asks how he opened it without the key, and the hero says being an ancient human has its advantages. The noblewoman then repeats the term, ancient human, and seems to be starting to believe his story. With her hand on her chin, she stares at him and asks if he's serious that he came from 100 million years ago. Our protagonist just observes a green monster in a cage, looking very focused on the scene. He then comments that the situation is strange and wonders why the creatures are so calm. With a serious look, the white-haired man doesn't understand why they let themselves be captured. We see that not even the other corruptors show any sign that they will try to escape the place. He then remembers that the bandits' monsters were also quiet and calm in their cages. But the most important thing is how they managed to bring the giant creatures to that secret place. The noblewoman says her brother was right and that the academy is indeed a suspicious and dangerous place. With that, the young woman suggests they wait in hiding until the culprit appears, but the hero refuses. The savior explains that their priority is to seal the academy and get rid of the monsters as quickly as possible. The girl asks if he's going to let the culprit escape, and he says he understands her feelings, but it's risky. He reveals that if the creatures get loose, the first victims will be the students who are right above. The white-haired man adds that even her brother would prioritize everyone's safety. With that, the noblewoman agrees, and the hero says he also has a bad feeling about it. He explains that his instincts never fail, and that's why he wants to investigate the laboratory for longer. The protagonist then asks her to call Argus so he can seal the academy, and the young woman agrees. The white-haired man then says goodbye to her and starts walking down the dark corridor of the laboratory. He then stops in front of a large clock on the wall and seems to be looking for some clue. With that, the hero hopes to find something that can help him understand the current situation of the place. The clock then continues to tick, and our protagonist continues his investigation of the laboratory. Meanwhile, upstairs, Professor Gilda and the other instructors are talking in the academy's corridor. Other professors then mock the wolf-eared man for getting beaten by the new instructor. Angrily, the professor says that because of that inferior species, his reputation has been ruined. He wonders how the hero uses 8 types of magic and says he is definitely cheating. Angrily, the man shouts that he will unmask the new instructor, no matter the cost, for everyone to see. But suddenly, the headmistress appears and calls him Lord Gilda, looking a little annoyed with him. She asks him to stop his bizarre movements as he is scaring the other students nearby. At this, the headmistress asks Professor Gilda if she has seen Lord Rudman around recently. The wolf-eared man replies that he hasn't seen him since the ceremony and that this is a problem. With that, the headmistress says there was something she wanted to discuss with him about the freshman's curriculum. But suddenly the woman stops talking and seems to have noticed something very strange in the air. Looking outside, she sees a purple energy in the sky and wonders what that bizarre thing is. Elsewhere, the young noblewoman runs desperately up the stairs, looking very scared. With that, she finally manages to get out of the secret passage and reaches the storage room. Completely out of breath, the girl stops for a moment and tries to catch her breath. She then says she needs to report everything to her brother, but a mysterious voice interrupts her. The young woman then turns with a look of pure fear and is completely paralyzed and speechless. Before her is Professor Rudman, and the blonde-haired girl calls him Miss Liltons. The professor then gives a completely sinister and terrifying smile to the horrified noblewoman. Back in the laboratory, a large metal door with a red light slowly opens. Our white-haired protagonist stares at the scene and wonders what that is in front of him. Before him is a type of giant core that looks like a brain pulsating with red energy. The savior notices that it is pulsing as if it were alive and is very impressed. He then wonders if it was Kagura who created the thing and approaches a computer. At that, the hero finds a small black briefcase hidden in the computer's panel. Inside, he finds a message cube and a syringe with nanomachines left by Kagura. With that, Jinshida holds the cube and hopes to find some clue about the current state of the world. The cube then projects a hologram and Kagura's image appears, asking if his friend can hear him. The scientist explains that this laboratory is the closest one to where the protagonist awoke from his sleep. At this, the hero's friend reveals that they were building an incredible device in that place. He adds that a part of this device's function was sealed within the nanomachines. With a genius pose, the scientist then asks his friend what he thinks this device is. Without beating around the bush, Kagura reveals that it is a teleportation device, and the hero is completely shocked. Our protagonist then repeats the words teleportation and device, not believing it. He then remembers the giant corruptors that were quiet and calm in their iron cages. With that, the savior stares at the pulsating core and thinks that it can't be what he's imagining. Jin then remembers that the bandit's monster was also completely quiet and calm in its cage. The white-haired man then remembers the strange clock he found on the laboratory wall. With a serious look, he realizes that the clock actually seemed much more complex than normal. Back at the computer, the white-haired hero continues his investigation with the pulsating core in the background. With a determined look, the protagonist repeats once more that it is all a teleportation device. It is a technology that connects one space to another, and that couldn't be achieved 100 million years ago. He then remembers what Argus said about the invaders appearing in the royal capital. With that, he realizes that the monsters were sent through the secret teleportation device. The savior remembers the invaders who were at the bandits' base and how they were also quiet. At this, Kagura shows a device and says that is the teleportation device he created. But the hero is confused because the device the scientist showed looks very different from the red core. He then turns to the core and wonders what the heck that thing in front of him is. Suddenly, the clock on the wall starts to move, and it seems to have activated something in the place. With that, the large red core begins to shine intensely with a very strong and blinding light. Our protagonist is then startled by the situation and prepares for what's to come. The red light then illuminates all the cages, and the corruptors seem to be being activated. Even the giant monsters that were at the large gate also begin to glow in the dark. At this, several beams of red light come out of the cages, and the monsters begin to disappear from there. Meanwhile, in the capital, Argus's companion runs towards him and shouts that it's an emergency. With a serious look, the noble knight stares at the sky and seems to already know what's happening. Several corruptors then begin to fall from the sky, and Argus realizes that the worst-case scenario has happened. Back at the academy, the young noblewoman asks Rodman what's wrong and why he's so serious. The professor then gives a strange smile and calls her Miss Oltons in a very sinister way. With that, the girl releases her power and shouts for Rodman to get out of the way and asks if he is involved. The professor then reveals that she has already figured everything out and that the young woman was snooping around. The noblewoman then asks what he means by it's too late and seems very worried. Without hesitation, Rodman reveals with a wicked smile that today was the day they executed the plan. He explains that the plan was for later, but because of her, he decided to move things up. In his thoughts, the villain remembers our white-haired protagonist and his power. He thinks that this man will surely become a great threat to his plans. By intuition, he knows that Jin is as troublesome as the spoiled noblewoman's older brother. The villain reveals that the hero has actually already found the secret passage that was there. He knows the protagonist is down there and wants to get rid of any problems at once. With a challenging smile, the noblewoman asks if the professor really thinks he can win the fight. Rodman replies that he certainly can because he has a new invincible power now. He then shouts that he has obtained an invincible power, but suddenly two girls appear with a vase. The young blonde woman is confused, and the villain says he will also show her his new power. With a wicked smile, he says that this is his new and powerful battle power. But to everyone's surprise, the person there was Hakama, who gives a confident smile. The girl then prepares to attack, and with a sigh, she just closes her eyes. Next, Hakama says she won, and we see that the professor was knocked out with the giant vase. The noblewoman asks why the girl is there, and Hakama replies that she was looking for Jin. She explains that things are getting crazy outside, and that they need Jin's help. Hakama says that another girl named Kudo said she saw the hero entering that place. The young Kudo then introduces herself to the noblewoman and confirms that she is a freshman at the academy. With that, Hakama's friend asks if it's okay to hit a professor like that. Hakama says it's fine because no one saw their faces and they can blame the spoiled noblewoman. Suddenly, our white-haired protagonist finally appears coming out of the secret passage. Jin then shouts for Hakama and asks what happened to Professor Rodman on the floor. The young woman runs to the savior and says that things are getting ugly outside the academy. The hero replies that he knows and reveals that all the invaders from the research facility have disappeared. With that, the noblewoman realizes that all the monsters have been released into the royal capital at once. The group then runs to the outside of the academy to see what is happening. From above, they see the entire capital on fire and being attacked by corruptors. In the streets, people run desperately while a wolf-like monster pursues them. In the sky, a griffin-like creature grabs a man and carries him high up without mercy. A giant monster then steps on the ground and crushes everything in its path with its huge paw. The creature then stares at the city with its glowing eyes and prepares for the attack. With a terrifying roar, the giant corruptor unleashes a great wave of energy and power. Seeing the scene, the young noblewoman is completely terrified by the destruction of the royal capital. The protagonist then gets angry and says he misjudged the situation and should have destroyed the device. At that, Hakama calls him and points to a giant monster that is in the middle of the whole city. The creature then begins to gather a large amount of energy in its mouth to attack. With a look of pure terror, the corruptor prepares a golden energy beam to fire. The giant monster then turns towards the great royal castle that is in the center of the city. With that, the noblewoman realizes that the target of the attack is the royal castle and that the royal family will be attacked. The savior says it's his fault and that he will resolve the situation, taking the syringe he found. Surrounded by a blue aura, the hero reveals that he will gain a simplified version of teleportation. Kagura explains that the energy embedded in the nanomachines has a limit of only one use per day. The ability is also restricted to short distances and only works within his line of sight. With that, the giant monster finally fires its attack, and a blast of energy goes towards the castle. The scientist then adds that with this power, the hero can simply jump to any place. Without hesitation, Jinshid-Du appears in front of the castle to be able to stop the monster's powerful attack. And using his hand, he creates an energy barrier to block the blast and save everyone on the spot.